Thank you. All right. Okay, so coming up now is our wonderful speaker, Kate Capogreco. She's our Unity Ottawa Spiritual Director. And she's a wonderful person. And I look forward to her talk today. And I'm just going to share a little bit about Kate. Here's her bio, okay? So Kate grew up in a non-religious, non-spiritual household, which partly explains why she studied business administration at university. Her parents were shocked when she quit her job at one of the Big 10 accounting firms to become a bartender, which she found much more meaningful than working with numbers all day. In her late 20s, after having had a spiritual awakening while living in the Rocky Mountains, Kate discovered unity and a thirst for spiritual knowledge. She moved to Ottawa and did her master's degree in pastoral counseling at St. Paul's University. As you may know, a high percentage of the population of Ottawa work for the federal government. All of them have health insurance, yet none of it covered pastoral counseling. So Kate struggled to make it into a financially viable career. Also, she now had a husband and 2 babies, which took up a fair amount of her time. So Kate took a position as a caseworker with social services at the City of Ottawa, and has just retired from there after a fulfilling 25-year career with the city. While she was contemplating what to do in her retirement, the opportunity to do a virtual 2-year certificate program in spiritual direction through Unity Worldwide Ministries became available. It was clearly calling her name, and she graduated from the program this June. She's now ready to serve us as our very own spiritual director, but realizes that not very many of us know what a spiritual director actually does. So today, Kate is going to fill us in. So welcome, Kate.
Morning, everyone, and thank you, C, for your introduction. I'm not much of a techie person, so I don't have any slides to share with you. You just get to see me. Maybe that's something I'll work on teaching myself now that I have so much time in my retirement, but also, maybe not. We'll see. So a couple of weeks ago, I went to a play at the Ottawa Little Theatre. It was called Hilda's Yard. Maybe some of you also saw it. It was very good. It was set in the 1950s, and it started off with an opening monologue by Hilda, who's in her backyard talking to the neighbor on the other side of the fence. Hilda's telling her that she and her husband are finally empty nesters, and to celebrate, her husband is going out this morning to purchase their very own television set. Hilda is worried about how much this new television is going to cost them. She says, well, thank you, but hopefully we won't need good luck. Good luck is a last resort, isn't it? Luck is what you hope for before you start to pray. God, I'm coming to you because my luck has run out. And God gets mad at you because you didn't come to him in the first place, and he kills a relative. Not a close relative, a second cousin maybe, just to serve as a warning shot. Now, I found that very funny, and judging by the laughter in the audience, most other people did too. I hope you did too. I'm telling you about this to illustrate one of the many ways that humans can experience God. Hilda's experience of God is certainly very different from the way I experience God, and I suspect it's different from the way you do too. In fact, the ways we experience God are unique to each one of us. When I was in my mid-20s, I had the need to find myself, and I took a job working at Jasper Park Lodge. And yes, my heart has been breaking these last couple of weeks to see what's going on there with the wildfires. Anyway, I went out there with the weight of the world on my shoulders. What I found was that being in the mountains, surrounded by the majesty, the magnificence, and grandeur, I was overcome by the feeling of how small I was. It followed that if I'm that tiny, my problems must be tiny too. While I lived in the mountains, I naturally gravitated towards going for hikes and reading some of the spiritual books of the day, which got me into meditating. I started noticing the times when I felt an awareness of peace and contentment. Eventually, I felt I was more grounded in myself, and I came back to Ontario. I went to workshops, I wrote poetry, I discovered Unity Church in Toronto, I tried Buddhist chanting, went to mediums, went to an astrologer. I did whatever I could to access that feeling of something else, something that was not part of the so-called normal human experience. One day, it dawned on me that this feeling of something else was what some people call God. The way I experience the something else is as a feeling of serenity that seems to live in the area where my heart is. When I'm still and I meditate, that feeling engulfs me, and over the years has become a peace that is never far away from me. If I ever get to know you a little better, and if you're interested, I could tell you about the nudges, the coincidences, the visions, discoveries, and awareness, and even hearing the voice that makes up my own unique experience of God. Now, the important question is, how do you experience God, Spirit, a higher power, the Creator, the great mystery, the universe in your life? So this leads into what I'm here to talk to you about today, which is spiritual direction. As C indicated in her introduction, I recently completed 2 years of study through the Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute, and I now have a certificate in the art of spiritual direction. So you might be asking, what is this spiritual direction anyway? Spiritual direction has been around as long as there have been human beings. It has different meanings and has had different meanings over the course of history, and often involved some kind of guidance or counseling given by one individual, usually someone considered to be wise in the way of a particular faith, to another individual. Of course, as with many things, Unity teaches a slightly different slant on what spiritual direction is. And just so you know, this understanding of spiritual direction is embraced by people of many other faiths and practices too. So the term spiritual director can be misleading. A lot of people who are involved in this type of ministry prefer the term companion. Inside of my own head, I think of it more like spiritual accompaniment, but it's a bit awkward to say that I'm a spiritual accompanier. So I usually stick with spiritual director or spiritual companion. To be clear, though, I'm not here to direct you in the sense of telling you what to do or being an authority figure. The belief in this ministry is that you are directed, guided, nudged, lured from within by your inner voice, God, Spirit, the guiding force, the inner teacher, or your soul, whichever term resonates with you. The companion's role, or the director's role, is to invite you to listen more deeply to that inner voice or movement or nudging of spirit as you consider your life experiences. In spiritual direction, I sit with another person in the presence of God, and I listen for the voice of spirit. It might look a little like counseling because it is a one-on-one practice, and I will ask questions that encourage you to deeper reflection. Counseling can be task-driven, and it's often intended to address a particular problem. With spiritual direction, the only task is to be open to presence. At various times, this process can be challenging and thought-provoking. It can unlock deep feelings, which can be tough. But it can also unlock amazing feelings of connection, of understanding, purpose, and meaning, and on occasion, the most incredible feelings of being wrapped in unconditional love. Spiritual direction can help you get in touch with your authentic self and understand what you need to do in order to live your own truth. Once we align with our inner guidance, somehow the madness of the world recedes and we're on our way to wholeness. So you might wonder what I learned in my 2 years of part-time study that equips me to perform this kind of magic that I've just described. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my studies. The courses I took had exciting names like The Nature of Reality and Mysticism, Self-Awareness, Spiritual Direction and Truth in Action, Contemplative Practices, and Integrating Mind, Body, and Soul. There was a lot of reading about how people experience God, different faith styles, how spirituality is influenced by culture, race, family situation, and other things. The instructors were teachers, ministers, life coaches, and mystics. There are an incredible number of thoughtful books and essays written on everything from the embodiment of spirit to experiences of mysticism to radical current insights into the nature of consciousness. There was a lot of self-reflection. There was much practicing in small groups with other students, where one of us would be the director and the other would be the directee. I also did an internship where I engaged in spiritual direction with volunteers whom I didn't know before I met them in this context. Practices such as meditation, contemplative prayer, forgiveness, nature walking, body and breath work, yoga, and other creative outlets were things that I became familiar with so that I'd be able to suggest some of them depending on the directee's circumstances. But once we had learned about all of these fascinating things, the actual how of doing spiritual direction comes down to only one thing. I have to be disciplined and aware enough to get my ego out of the way in order for me to discern the movement of spirit in the safe space that I and my directee create together. When we talked about our practice sessions in class, it always came down to the same conclusion. When the ego gets out of the way, God is there and helps us to say and do the perfect thing at the perfect time in order to give our companion what they need to grow. All in all, I can truly say that participating in the learning and practicing of the art of spiritual direction has been one of the most meaningful experiences on my spiritual journey so far. Now, self-awareness in the context of spirit is a tender thing. In the past 2 years, I've managed to put into words things I've only ever felt in my heart, and it has enlarged me and given me a better understanding of the work of God in my life. I've looked back and seen the places where God was calling the shots, insistently, unquestionably pushing me in a certain direction. Often that looked and took the form of, I don't know what I want, but I don't want this. Through assignments, discussions, and sharing with my fellow students, I can see how my spiritual journey has evolved and continues to evolve. Sharing our journey with others is one of the best ways to become aware of the movement of spirit in our lives. You might have heard of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He was a French Catholic priest in the early and middle part of the 1900s. And he was the one who said, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." It's something that I say to myself often when I'm feeling uncertain or need some grounding and reassurance. During the course of my studies, I connected with a writing of his called the Patient Trust Prayer. I'd like to read the first and last stanzas of that prayer because I find them filled with a very deep understanding of our human condition. He says, "Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient of being on the way to something unknown and something new. Only God could say what the Spirit gradually forming within you will be. Give our Lord the benefit of believing that His hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete. This business of being human can be pretty tricky at times. Don't we often feel in suspense and incomplete? We're constantly faced with big decisions, big and small decisions, from what to have for dinner tonight, to choosing the right person to marry, the right career path, even whether or not now was the right time for me to retire. Discernment is the word we sometimes use for the process of figuring out the answers to those decisions. In a spiritual sense, discernment means coming to understand what best aligns with my authentic self and with what my higher power is calling me to do. Easy, right? No, it's not all that easy. First, you have the task of understanding who you are in your authentic self. And then you have to be able to know how your higher power is communicating with you. For me, when I'm meditating, I feel an almost physical sensation of dropping down, feeling my body relax and my awareness lower into a place that's located in the region of my heart. I was thinking about what it feels like for me that inspired me to call this talk. Is it the voice of spirit, or is it just heartburn? Because really, how do you know? You know? This is where spiritual direction can help. Pastoral counseling is much more psychology-based. In the study of pastoral counseling, there were all kinds of theories and techniques, and I felt like I came away carrying a toolbox determined to help people fix things, like a plumber or an electrician. In contrast, spiritual direction can feel like putting on a soft, fuzzy sweater, like opening my door to someone to enter a sacred space, like sharing a cup of tea and telling stories, like sitting by the fire with the knowledge that something wonderful is brewing. The toolbox sits off to the side, accessible when I feel the nudge that tells me something is needed from there. My spiritual journey has been a relatively solitary one, and opening up to my own spiritual director has affirmed for me that the stirrings, visions, insights I experience are real. There's no fear that anything I experience is too weird, too off the mark, or too insignificant to be considered a real message from spirit. With my spiritual director, I tease out the meaning of what I'm feeling and experiencing, and I always come away affirmed and supported on my spiritual path. Perhaps spiritual direction can be compared to two people paddling a canoe together. The canoe, which represents spirit, holds the experience, while the person sitting in the back subtly steers based on where the current is taking them. I appreciate the gentleness of this image, the companionship it suggests, the fact that it takes place in nature, and the movement that's inherent in the action. Also, the feelings of support from the craft and the water underneath, and the mutual participation in the activity. Our different backgrounds, traditions, belief systems, faith practices, and experiences are insignificant in the vast, peaceful, sustaining embrace of the one power. As a spiritual director, it's my job to hold space for the magic and mystery of that embrace and know whatever the directee needs for their unique spiritual evolution will emerge. I can sit in stillness with an open and aware heart space and have faith that spirit will be the true director of whatever happens when we're together. Your personal beliefs, faith, lived experience, fears and anxieties, and spiritual awareness will be the threads of the beautiful and unique tapestry we can weave together in spirit. In complete faith, I can tell a directee to be still and listen to your heart. It will tell you where you need to go and what to do. The conversations that you have with the divine are as unique as your own identity, and you can discern the next steps in your personal journey. So I'm happy to say that I'm now open for business. The office at Unity Ottawa has very generously agreed to support my ministry as a spiritual director. If you're interested in meeting with me, you can email officeunityottawa@yahoo.ca and we can work out the timing. Normally, our spiritual direction sessions will be about an hour long and would happen about once a month. I should also tell you that I do have a supervisor who I'll meet with once a month to talk about my experiences as a spiritual director. She's actually one of the practicum teachers from my course. No personal information or identifying characteristics of the people I'm working with would be disclosed, but my supervisor will help me look at what's going well and what might be improved in my practice. All spiritual directors are encouraged to have a supervisor, even people with a lot of experience, since it makes sense that we check in with each other and keep each other on the right track. If spiritual direction sounds like something you'd like to explore, I'll be very honored to work with you. Thank you. Now, for our meditation, I've prepared something a little different for you today. It's something that I hadn't heard of before, learning about it in class, but apparently it's a practice that's been around as long as we've had written language. Lectio Divina is the practice of meditating on a passage of writing. Often people will meditate on a passage from the Bible or from some other scriptures according to their own faith traditions. But really, you can do it with any writing that seems like it has something to say. For today, I've chosen to use a poem called The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry, one of my favorites. So I'm going to read the poem 4 times, and before I read it each time, I'll say a brief sentence or two about what to listen for as I read it. After each reading, there'll be a minute or so of silence for you to reflect on anything that might be resonating within you. So settle into a comfortable position, and let's take a deep, grounding breath. For this first read through, simply listen to the text without trying to hear it any differently than it's being presented. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. This time when I read it again, listen for meaning and understanding. Why was it written? What does it tell you about God? Be open to receiving the meaning rather than to assigning a meaning. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be. I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Now, when I read it, pay attention to your emotional response. Listen deeply and open to spirit. When despair from the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Finally, as I read it for the last time, rest in quiet, receptive silence. Let go of all thoughts and images. Let presence come to you. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests his beauty in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Thank you, universe, for our time together, for being present and active in our lives, and for being an energy of love and understanding that we can access at any time. We are grateful for the beauty, mystery, and abundance that has been created for us. Thank you all for being with me today. I wish you a joy-filled day and a wonderful week ahead. Namaste.